Your pantry might already contain foods that will still be edible long after you, your children, and possibly your grandchildren are gone. That is not an exaggeration. That is not clickbait. There are foods sitting in ordinary homes right now that carry shelf lives measured not in months or years, but in decades, and in some cases, indefinitely. Whether you care deeply about emergency preparedness, whether you just hate watching food expire and get thrown in the trash, or whether you simply want to stretch your grocery budget further than ever before, understanding which foods truly never spoil changes everything about how you stock your home. This is one of those videos where, by the end, you will never look at your pantry the same way again. Some of these foods have been trusted by ancient civilizations, carried across oceans by explorers, and rationed out to soldiers in the field. Others are modern pantry staples you have probably bought dozens of times without realizing they could outlast multiple generations. Every single food on this list comes with one essential condition, and that is proper storage. We are talking about mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. More on exactly how that works a little later, but first, let us get into the list. The first food is white rice. If you have spent any time around the prepping or emergency preparedness community, this one will not shock you. But even if you are brand new to all of this, white rice deserves the top spot on this list because of how remarkably well it performs over time. Stored correctly, away from moisture and oxygen, white rice has a minimum shelf life of 25 to 30 years. Seal it properly, and it becomes essentially indefinite. The reason comes down to how white rice is processed. During milling, the bran and the germ are stripped away. Those two components are where the natural oils live, and oils are what cause grains to go rancid. Brown rice, which keeps its bran and germ intact, only lasts somewhere between 1 and 5 years because of those oils. White rice loses that vulnerability entirely. What you're left with is a clean, calorie-dense, incredibly versatile food that billions of people around the world already depend on daily. From a food storage standpoint, white rice is nearly impossible to beat. It's cheap. It stores compactly. It does not require a large amount of water to prepare compared to some other staples. Keep it sealed, keep it dry, keep it away from pests, and you have decades of food security sitting quietly in a closet or a dedicated storage area. It requires almost no effort to maintain, which makes it the foundation of any serious long-term pantry. Now, have you ever wondered what food pairs so well with rice that together they essentially form a complete nutritional package? The answer brings us directly to the next item on this list: dried beans and legumes. In preparedness circles, beans and rice are spoken of as a single unit, almost like they are inseparable, and there's a very good reason for that. Pinto beans, black beans, kidney beans, lentils, chickpeas, all of them carry shelf lives of at least 25 to 30 years when stored in mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. Together with rice, they form what is considered by many in the preparedness world to be the ultimate long-term survival food combination. There is one important caveat to understand about beans as they age. Over time, they harden. A 20-year-old batch of beans is going to need an overnight soak before cooking, possibly longer, and then a slow simmer that takes hours rather than minutes. That extended prep time does not make them unsafe, it just means they require more patience. The nutritional value, the protein, the fiber, all of it remains intact. Beans are affordable, dense with nutrients, and when combined with rice, they create a meal that provides genuine sustenance. That combination has kept people alive through some of history's hardest moments, and it remains just as relevant today. The next food might surprise you given how ordinary it feels: dried pasta. Most people think of pasta as a short-term pantry item, something that gets cycled through regularly, but dried pasta stored correctly will easily last over 30 years. Even sitting in its original store packaging, it will remain good for years well beyond the printed best by date. The freeze-dried lack of moisture is what makes it work. The one genuine downside of pasta in a long-term storage context is water. Cooking it requires a meaningful amount, which matters when water availability becomes a concern. But if water is not an issue, pasta is a powerhouse. It's cheap, It cooks quickly. It pairs with virtually anything, including jarred or canned tomato sauce that keeps for years on its own. Pasta earns its place on this list purely through its combination of accessibility, cost, and longevity.
Now we move into territory that most people have never encountered in their daily lives. A food so ancient, so purpose-built for survival, that it has sustained explorers crossing unknown oceans and indigenous hunters crossing frozen tundra. That food is pemmican. Pemmican is one of the original survival superfoods developed by Native American peoples and later adopted by explorers and traders who needed maximum nutrition in minimum weight. It is made from dried lean meat, typically bison or beef, ground into a fine powder and then mixed thoroughly with rendered animal fat, usually tallow. Sometimes dried berries are added to the mixture. The result is a compact, dense, highly caloric food that requires no refrigeration and almost no preparation. The secret to pemmican's extraordinary shelf life lies in the rendered fat. Saturated fat contains almost no moisture, and it forms a natural seal around the meat particles, blocking oxygen completely. When stored in airtight containers, pemmican can remain edible well beyond 50 years. In everyday packaging, even 5 to 10 years is achievable. It can be eaten directly or added to soups and stews as a concentrated base. It is not going to win any awards for flavor, but in a situation where calories and nutrition are scarce, pemmican is one of the most historically proven foods in existence. Speaking of foods that are built for function over flavor, the next one is legendary for being almost aggressively unpleasant to eat while simultaneously being nearly indestructible. Hardtack. This is food reduced to its absolute bare minimum: flour, water, and a small amount of salt, baked until the result is closer to a building material than a meal. Civil War soldiers chewed on hardtack every single day and gave it nicknames like tooth dullers and iron crackers. Those names should tell you something about the texture. But here is the remarkable part. There are surviving examples of Civil War-era hardtack that are still technically edible today. Not appetizing, not enjoyable, but edible. The reason is simple. Hardtack contains no fat, no sugar, and essentially no moisture. Bacteria and mold have nothing to consume. Without anything to feed on, spoilage cannot occur. Soldiers in the field would soak hardtack in hot coffee or drop it into stews to soften it enough to eat without risking dental damage. It kept armies fed and functional across long campaigns in brutal conditions. As a pure survival food, very few things in history have proven more reliable. Now we get to what is probably the most famous immortal food on the planet, something discovered in ancient Egyptian tombs that was still perfectly good thousands of years after it was sealed away: raw honey. Archaeologists have pulled sealed jars of honey from tombs dating back 3,000 years and found it completely edible. That is not folklore, that is documented history. Honey does not expire. It will crystallize over time and become hard, but gentle warming will restore it to its original flowing consistency without any loss of quality. The reason honey never spoils comes down to chemistry. It has an extremely low moisture content, a naturally high sugar concentration, and a pH that is inherently acidic. Together, those three factors create an environment where bacteria, mold, and virtually every other microorganism simply cannot survive. It is worth emphasizing that the honey in question needs to be raw and unprocessed. Many products sold as honey have been diluted or processed to the point where these natural protective properties are significantly reduced. True raw honey, sealed in a glass jar and stored at room temperature, will outlast everything else in your pantry. Raw honey also has a remarkable history of medical use. Its antibacterial properties have been documented for thousands of years across dozens of cultures. In a long-term preparedness scenario, honey would serve not only as a food and sweetener, but also as a basic medicinal resource. That dual function makes it one of the highest value items you can keep in long-term storage. What else shares honey's extraordinary resistance to spoilage through high sugar concentration? Pure maple syrup. And the word pure is absolutely critical here, just as it was with honey. Highly processed syrups or pancake toppings made mostly from corn syrup do not carry the same properties. Real maple syrup, the kind made from actual maple sap, creates the same hostile environment for bacteria that honey does. The sugar concentration is too high for microbial life to establish itself. Unopened, pure maple syrup will last indefinitely. Once opened, refrigeration helps prevent mold from forming on the surface. But even opened bottles stored in cool, dry conditions tend to hold up well for extended periods. Crystallization may appear over time, just like with honey, but that is a cosmetic issue and has no bearing on safety or flavor.
While we are on the subject of sweeteners with indefinite shelf lives, molasses deserves attention. It is not the most obvious choice for a long-term pantry. Most people associate it primarily with very specific baking applications or as an ingredient in things like barbecue sauce. But molasses, with its high sugar content, lasts indefinitely when stored properly. Unopened, it keeps forever. Even after opening, a tightly sealed container stored at room temperature will remain good for years. Like honey and maple syrup, molasses may thicken or develop some crystallization over time. That does not affect safety or usefulness. Molasses is notably rich in iron and several important minerals, which gives it nutritional value beyond just serving as a sweetener. In a long-term food storage context, it adds flavor complexity to otherwise bland meals and provides trace nutrients that might otherwise be hard to source. Now, the next food on this list is not glamorous. It is not one people get excited about. But it is so fundamentally essential to food preservation, cooking, and sanitation that it deserves a prominent place here. Salt. Pure salt is a mineral. It has been sitting in the earth for millions of years. A few additional decades in your pantry mean absolutely nothing to it. Salt itself does not spoil. Full stop. There is no mechanism by which it could. It is not organic. It does not contain oils. It does not have moisture that can go rancid or feed bacteria. In fact, salt does the opposite. It actively pulls moisture out of its environment, which is precisely why it has been used as a food preservative throughout human history. The key is to use pure salt. Sea salt, kosher salt, Himalayan and pink salt, any of these work. Iodized table salt is slightly different because of the added iodine, which can degrade over very long periods, though the salt itself remains perfectly usable. If stored in a sealed container away from humidity, it will keep forever with zero degradation. Consider also that salt has uses far beyond cooking. It is essential for food preservation, for basic sanitation purposes, and in some scenarios for medical applications. It is cheap, it is universally available, and it is one of the most overlooked survival resources in any long-term preparedness plan. What sits right alongside salt in terms of simplicity, longevity, and widespread use? Sugar. White sugar, brown sugar, and powdered sugar all have indefinite shelf lives when stored correctly. Just like salt, sugar creates an environment that bacteria and mold cannot survive in. The osmotic pressure created by its high concentration draws moisture away from any microorganisms trying to establish themselves, preventing growth entirely. Sugar's one vulnerability is moisture. If sugar gets wet, it clumps and hardens. If it stays dry and sealed, it lasts forever. One important note for anyone sealing sugar in mylar bags: do not use oxygen absorbers with sugar. Oxygen absorbers will cause sugar to solidify into a single dense block that becomes nearly impossible to use. Store it in airtight containers without the absorbers, and it will remain loose and ready to use indefinitely. Brown sugar hardens over time, even in normal storage conditions. This is a well-known phenomenon that is easy to reverse. A brief time in the microwave or a few slices of bread left in the container overnight will draw the moisture back in and restore it to a usable consistency. Sugar may not seem exciting, but it is calorie-dense. It makes otherwise bland emergency foods significantly more tolerable, and it is an essential ingredient in baking and preservation. Distilled white vinegar is another food that lasts indefinitely, and it works through a completely different mechanism than everything else on this list. Vinegar is highly acidic. That acidity creates an environment where bacteria simply cannot survive, which is why vinegar has been used for centuries as a pickling and preservation agent. You can see this function directly in everyday foods like pickles, relish, and various condiments. Over very long periods, vinegar may develop some cloudiness or slight sediment at the bottom of the bottle. Neither of these signals spoilage. The product remains fully safe and functional. Vinegar also carries uses well beyond cooking. It serves as a cleaning agent, a disinfectant, a basic household cleaner, and has some documented health applications as well. Apple cider vinegar, balsamic vinegar, and wine vinegars all last for extended periods, but plain distilled white vinegar carries the longest shelf life of the group and the widest range of practical uses. The next one is personal. It is for everyone who considers their morning ritual non-negotiable, regardless of circumstances. Instant coffee. Freeze-dried instant coffee crystals stored properly in mylar bags with oxygen absorbers can last up to 30 years or longer.
Even in an ordinary sealed jar sitting in a pantry, instant coffee will stay good for years, well beyond any printed expiration date. The freeze-drying process strips out all moisture, leaving behind stable coffee crystals that resist spoilage almost indefinitely. What does happen over time is a gradual loss of flavor intensity and caffeine potency. But here is the reality of a genuine emergency situation. Flavor expectations tend to adjust quickly. Coffee that is slightly less vibrant than a fresh roast is still enormously valuable when it represents the only source of a caffeine boost available. Instant coffee is lightweight. It requires nothing more than hot water to prepare. No equipment, no filters, no grinder. In a long-term preparedness context, that simplicity is a serious advantage. Alongside instant coffee on the list of comfort foods that happen to last essentially forever is pure cocoa powder. And again, the word pure matters here. 100% unsweetened cocoa powder with no added milk solids, no added sugar, and no other additives. Pure cocoa powder is naturally very low in moisture and relatively low in fat, which means bacteria and mold have almost nothing to work with. Stored in a sealed, airtight container, it lasts indefinitely. Combined with a small amount of your stored sugar and some powdered milk, cocoa powder allows you to produce hot chocolate. That might sound minor. In a prolonged emergency situation, having access to something warm, sweet, and familiar does more for morale than many people initially appreciate. Cocoa powder also works in baking applications and adds depth to savory recipes. It earns its spot in long-term food storage through sheer versatility. Now, the next food on this list is a personal favorite, and the challenge is usually keeping enough of it around because it gets used so quickly. Ghee. For anyone unfamiliar, ghee is butter that has been cooked down far beyond normal clarified butter. The process removes all the milk solids and all the water content, leaving behind pure butter fat. That pure fat, sealed in a mason jar, is stable at room temperature for an extraordinarily long time, essentially indefinitely when stored properly. The reason ghee resists going rancid so effectively is that it is composed almost entirely of saturated fat. Saturated fats are chemically more stable than unsaturated fats, meaning they do not break down and oxidize the same way. This is precisely why vegetable oils and regular butter go bad while ghee does not. Ghee has deep roots in Indian cooking and culture, where it has been stored at room temperature for thousands of years. In fact, aged ghee in that culinary tradition is considered more prized than fresh ghee, not less. The flavor of ghee is rich and nutty, with a slightly toasty quality that is difficult to describe accurately until you've actually tasted it. It performs exceptionally well in high heat cooking because the milk solids that cause butter to burn have already been removed. In any long-term food storage situation where access to refrigeration disappears, butter and fresh dairy products become unavailable almost immediately. Ghee fills that gap perfectly. It provides fat for cooking, adds flavor to otherwise plain foods, and carries a shelf life that outlasts virtually everything else in your storage. Keep several sealed jars on the shelf and rotate them into regular cooking now so you build familiarity with how to use it before you ever actually need it. Before moving into the near forever category, a quick note. If this kind of content is useful to you, if knowing that real people are creating this information matters, please hit the like button and share it. It helps my channel, reach more people who genuinely need this information. Now, back to the list. Not every food in a serious long-term storage plan needs to last forever. Some foods that carry 25 to 40-year shelf lives when stored correctly represent enormous value, even if they are not technically immortal. White flour is one of these. Much like white rice, white flour has had the bran and germ removed during milling. Those components contain the oils that cause spoilage, so their removal dramatically extends shelf life. Stored in mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, white flour will last somewhere between 10 and 25 years depending on specific conditions. Whole wheat flour, which retains the bran and germ, lasts only a few years by comparison. White flour is inexpensive and forms the base of an enormous range of foods: bread, biscuits, thickeners for soups and stews, pasta dough, pancakes, flatbreads. The ability to bake from scratch using stored ingredients transforms a survival food pantry into something that can produce genuinely satisfying meals rather than just caloric intake. Non-fat powdered milk is another food that falls into this near-forever category. The non-fat specification is important.
Fat content is what causes dairy products to go rancid, and removing the fat extends shelf life substantially. Non-fat powdered milk stored in mylar bags will last 15 to 20 years. In its original store packaging, that window is considerably shorter. It is not going to taste exactly like fresh milk straight out of the carton. That is worth acknowledging honestly. A small amount of vanilla or sugar stirred into the reconstituted version improves it considerably. For use in cereal, baking, or cooking, the flavor difference matters much less and is largely unnoticeable. Powdered milk provides calcium, protein, and the flexibility to add dairy functionality to a wide range of recipes without any refrigeration requirements whatsoever. Rolled oats and steel-cut oats belong on this list with confidence. Stored properly in mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, oats will last 20 to 30 years, possibly longer. Oats do contain some natural oils, which would normally be a concern for long-term storage, but removing the oxygen prevents those oils from oxidizing and going rancid for a remarkably long time. Oats are among the most nutritionally complete grains available. They provide complex carbohydrates for sustained energy, soluble fiber for digestive health, and a meaningful amount of protein. They are also extraordinarily versatile. Hot oatmeal, overnight oats, granola, baked goods, even ground into a rough flour for baking. Oats are affordable, store well in bulk, and provide a genuinely hearty meal option that goes well beyond the caloric minimum. They're a true pantry staple that rewards serious storage quantities. Instant mashed potatoes, or more precisely, plain potato flakes, are significantly underappreciated in the long-term food storage conversation. These are not a lesser version of real potatoes. They are actually made from real potatoes that have been fully cooked, mashed, and then dehydrated to remove essentially all moisture. When stored correctly in mylar bags, plain potato flakes will last 20 to 30 years. Rehydration is extremely fast. Hot water and a couple of minutes is all it takes to go from dry flakes to mashed potatoes. They serve as a side dish, a thickener for soups and stews, a base for potato-based bread, or simply a source of filling, palatable calories when options are limited. Plain, unflavored potato flakes are the variety to look for. The flavored or pre-seasoned versions carry additional ingredients that reduce shelf life and limit their versatility. Freeze-dried foods as a category deserve their own mention. These are the commercially packaged, long-term meals and individual ingredients sold by preparedness companies. Most freeze-dried food products carry shelf lives of around 25 years, sometimes more. The freeze-drying process removes virtually all moisture from the food while preserving the cellular structure, which means the food rehydrates quickly and retains most of its original nutritional profile. The trade-off is cost. Freeze-dried foods are considerably more expensive per calorie than bulk staples like rice, beans, oats, or flour. What they offer in exchange is convenience. They come in sealed containers, often large cans or buckets, that require no additional processing or repackaging. You store them, you forget about them, and they are there when needed. For people who want a solid long-term storage foundation without the time investment of buying bulk staples and repackaging them into mylar bags, freeze-dried options fill that role effectively. A combination approach, freeze-dried items for convenience and bulk staples for volume, is often the most practical strategy. Now, all of this comes back to one critical point that was mentioned at the very beginning. Every single food on this list requires proper storage to reach its maximum shelf life potential. That means mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. Mylar bags are made from a material that blocks light completely and provides an excellent barrier against moisture and outside air. Light, oxygen, and moisture are the three main enemies of long-term food storage. Eliminating all three creates the optimal preservation environment. Mylar bags handle light and moisture. Oxygen absorbers handle the oxygen. Oxygen absorbers are small packets of iron powder that react with oxygen molecules in the air, pulling them out of the sealed bag and binding them chemically. Once sealed, the food inside is sitting in an environment with no oxygen, very little light, and minimal moisture, which is precisely why these shelf lives stretch across decades rather than years. There is an important distinction to remember about which foods work with oxygen absorbers and which do not. Salt and sugar should never be stored in mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. The absorbers will cause both products to solidify into dense, barely workable blocks.
For those two, standard airtight containers without absorbers are the correct approach. Everything else on this list benefits from the full mylar bag and oxygen absorber treatment. Is this a significant investment of time and effort up front? Somewhat, but consider the alternative. Foods stored this way do not need to be rotated for 20, 30, or in some cases hundreds of years. You do the work once and the protection is in place. What does a well-rounded long-term pantry actually look like when you put this all together? It starts with a foundation of white rice and dried beans in significant quantities. Those two foods alone cover caloric needs and basic protein for extended periods. Flour, oats, and potato flakes add variety and the ability to prepare different types of meals from scratch. Salt and sugar are non-negotiable essentials that support both cooking and preservation. Honey, maple syrup, and molasses add sweetness and flavor that make long-term eating tolerable rather than purely functional. Ghee provides essential cooking fat without refrigeration. Instant coffee and cocoa powder handle morale and comfort in ways that matter more than many people initially expect. Vinegar serves as both a culinary ingredient and a cleaning and preservation resource. Hardtack and Pemmican represent the extreme end of longevity for anyone wanting options that trace back through centuries of proven use. The underlying theme across all of these foods is the same. What causes food to spoil is moisture, oxygen, light, and in some cases heat. Remove those factors and food lasts far beyond what most people assume is possible. The science behind this is not complicated, but the implications are significant. Human beings have known this at some level for thousands of years, which is why so many of the oldest surviving civilizations developed preservation techniques that align perfectly with modern food storage best practices. You do not need a basement full of industrial equipment to build a serious long-term pantry. You need mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, a heat sealer, or a clothes iron for sealing, and the right foods. The initial investment in both money and time is far smaller than most people expect, and what you get in return is genuine food security that does not require constant attention or rotation. One final thought before wrapping up. Long-term food storage is not exclusively a prepper concern. Rising food costs, supply chain unpredictability, natural disasters, and personal financial hardship are all situations where a well-stocked pantry changes outcomes significantly. Having 6 months or a year of core staples stored properly does not make you extreme, it makes you prepared for the kinds of disruptions that happen to real people in real communities every single year. Start with what you can.
Even adding 1 or 2 items from this list to your pantry each month builds toward meaningful food security over time. White rice and dried beans are the most logical starting point because of cost, availability, and the sheer number of years they will protect you. Add honey early because of its additional medical value. Then build outward from there at whatever pace makes sense for your budget and your situation. If this video gave you something useful, something that you will actually act on, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. This is my channel, and every like helps put this information in front of more people who are genuinely looking for it. We will see you in the next one. Take care and get prepared.